A bull moose can weigh over 1,000 pounds. It has antlers like a weapon rack, legs built to break through crusted snow, and almost no natural predators once it's full grown. And yet, in parts of New England, wildlife biologists have watched these giants die slowly, over a single winter, undone by something you could balance on your fingertip. Not a wolf, not a bear, a tick. To understand how something that small can take down something that large, you have to understand what a tick actually is, and it turns out almost everyone has the story wrong. If you'd rather understand how the natural world actually works, then repeat the same tired, creepy bug story. Subscribe. That's really the whole point of this channel. Ask most people what a tick is for, and you'll get a shrug or a shudder. To most of us, ticks aren't wildlife. They're a threat to check for after a hike, a reason to tuck your pants into your socks, a small dark spot you pray isn't attached. That reaction isn't irrational. Ticks are parasites, and some species do carry serious diseases. A fact this video isn't here to downplay or soften. If you find one attached to you, the standard medical advice still applies. Remove it properly and monitor the area. But biologists who actually study ticks describe something most of us never stop to consider: an animal with an extraordinarily refined survival toolkit. A genuinely ancient lineage stretching back further than almost anything else you'll meet outdoors. And strange as it sounds, a real, actively debated role in the ecosystems around us. The disgust most people feel is understandable. It just isn't the whole picture. Start with how old this design actually is. Ticks belong to the arachnids, the same broad group as spiders, scorpions, and mites, and researchers who study amber fossilized tree resin have described ticks preserved inside it from remarkably deep in the past. In one striking case, scientists described a tick found in amber alongside a dinosaur-era feather, dated to roughly 99 million years old. From the Cretaceous period, meaning relatives of the ticks we swat off ourselves today were very likely feeding on the ancestors of birds while dinosaurs still walked the earth. Other amber specimens, dated tens of millions of years later, show ticks caught mid-meal, bodies swollen with blood, a frozen snapshot of a feeding that never got to finish. Whatever you think of them, ticks are not some recent nuisance that showed up alongside humans. Their basic strategy, wait, sense, latch on, feed slowly, has apparently worked in essentially the same form since long before most of the animals on the planet today existed. Entire mountain ranges have risen and eroded since this design first appeared. Entire oceans have opened and closed. And this same patient blueprint just kept quietly working the whole time. It also helps to understand how many different kinds of this animal exist, because the tick isn't really one single creature at all. Scientists have described hundreds of species of hard ticks alone, spread across nearly every continent except Antarctica. From ticks that specialize in reptiles to ticks that specialize almost exclusively in seabirds returning to the same nesting cliffs year after year. Each species tends to be tuned to a fairly narrow set of hosts and habitats, which is part of why the animal has persisted for so long when one host population declines. The specialized tick population that depends on it often declines right alongside it. A quiet dependency most people never think to look for. That strategy depends on a body plan that's honestly closer to precision engineering than most people assume. Ticks don't chase anything, and they don't need to. Most species quest instead, climbing to the tip of a blade of grass or the edge of a leaf, extending their front pair of legs outward and simply waiting there, motionless, sometimes for weeks at a stretch. Those front legs carry something called a Haller's organ, a small cluster of sensory pits that can detect carbon dioxide, body heat, humidity, and even the shadow of something moving nearby, essentially a built-in early warning system tuned to breath and warmth rather than sight or sound. Once a tick makes contact with a passing host, it doesn't simply bite and hang on the way a mosquito does. Many species secrete a cement-like substance around their mouthparts, gluing themselves into place so firmly that the anchor point can sometimes remain behind even after the rest of the tick is removed. And their saliva isn't a passive fluid either. It contains a cocktail of compounds that can block pain signals at the bite site, suppress the host's local immune response, and prevent blood from clotting, allowing an unnoticed meal that can stretch on for days at a time without the host ever feeling it happen. Researchers studying tick saliva have even investigated some of these anticoagulant compounds as a starting point for potential medical applications, since a molecule this precise at stopping blood from clotting is, biochemically speaking, difficult to improve on from scratch. Even the tick's exterior is built for a job most animals never need to do, staying attached and hidden for days at a time. A hard tick's body is covered by a tough outer plate called a scutum, and behind it the rest of the abdomen is soft and remarkably elastic, able to stretch far beyond its original size as the animal fills with blood over the course of a single feeding. Field biologists describe fully engorged ticks as looking almost unrecognizable compared to their unfed state, swollen into something closer to a small grape than the flat, dark speck most people picture. That elasticity is the whole point. A slow, undetected meal requires a body that can quietly expand without ever needing to let go and start over. And we're only about halfway through how strange this animal actually gets. If that surprised you already, subscribe, because the next reveal is even harder to believe. Here's the part that tends to unsettle people most: patience, on a scale most animals simply don't operate at. A tick's entire life can revolve around waiting. Many hard tick species pass through 3 separate life stages: larva, nymph, and adult, and in many species, each stage needs its own separate blood meal from its own separate host before the animal can molt and move on to the next. That means a single tick's life cycle can stretch across 2 to 3 years from hatching to death. And the overwhelming majority of that time is spent doing essentially nothing but sitting, sensing, and waiting for the right animal to walk by. Some species can survive over a year without feeding at all, and in certain documented cases, researchers have recorded individuals surviving multiple years on stored reserves alone, barely moving, metabolism slowed almost to a stop. It's an almost unsettling kind of patience to imagine the biological equivalent of holding your breath for years at a time, on the off chance that exactly the right passerby eventually shows up. Which brings us back to that moose standing in the snow. Winter ticks, a species that specializes in large hosts like moose, don't quest for a single host and then move on the way many other species do. A single moose can end up carrying tens of thousands of them at once, all feeding simultaneously through the coldest months of the year, precisely when the moose can least afford to lose blood or energy. Wildlife biologists in the northeastern United States have documented moose so heavily infested that their coats appear rubbed raw and pale, from constant scratching against trees in an attempt to relieve the irritation, a phenomenon researchers sometimes describe informally as ghost moose. And calf mortality in the worst affected populations has been directly linked to these extreme tick loads. It's a genuinely brutal relationship, and nobody studying it pretends otherwise. But it's also, ecologically, exactly the kind of pressure that can keep a large herbivore population from overrunning the forests. It depends on a blunt, uncomfortable, but very real check on a species that has few other predators left across much of its modern range. That regulating role shows up elsewhere too, in smaller and considerably stranger ways. Some birds, oxpeckers being the most famous example, have long been described picking ticks directly off the backs of large mammals like buffalo, giraffes, and rhinos, a relationship older textbooks used to hold up as a clean example of mutualism. The bird gets an easy meal, the mammal gets free pest control. More recent research has complicated that tidy story considerably, showing that oxpeckers sometimes reopen old wounds to drink blood directly rather than simply removing parasites from the skin. Which means scientists now tend to describe the relationship as somewhere between genuine cooperation and low-grade exploitation, rather than pure teamwork. Either way, ticks sit right at the center of that entire dynamic, a food source substantial and reliable enough to shape the behavior of an entirely different species. That ecological role is exactly why entomologists who study ticks for a living have publicly wrestled with an uncomfortable question. What would actually happen if ticks simply vanished tomorrow? It's not an idle thought experiment. Researchers genuinely disagree about the answer. Some argue that removing ticks would mostly be a relief, with relatively little ecological cost, since so many other species prey on so many other things and the web of life tends to route around single losses. Others point to cases like the winter tick and moose, or to the birds and other predators that rely on ticks as a food source, and argue that their sudden disappearance would ripple outward in ways nobody can fully predict in advance. Nobody claims ticks are irreplaceable the way a true keystone predator might be. But the honest scientific answer to do we actually need ticks isn't a confident yes or a confident no. It's that the question remains genuinely open among the people who study it closely, which is a far more interesting answer than most viewers expect walking in. Different cultures have been wrestling with ticks for a very long time, usually without any of this ecological context available to them. In parts of rural Europe and North America, folk remedies for tick removal, from hot matches to petroleum jelly to alcohol, circulated for generations before modern medicine confirmed most of them either didn't work or actively made the situation worse by causing the tick to release more saliva into the wound. Even now, health guidance keeps pushing back against those old habits in favor of simple, mechanical removal with fine-tipped tweezers, gripping close to the skin and pulling steadily upward. It's a small reminder that humans have been trying to outsmart this particular animal for a very long time, usually without any real idea of just how sophisticated its side of that quiet contest actually was all along. So think back to that moose, standing in the snow, weighed down by thousands of animals almost too small to see with the naked eye. It's not a fair fight, and this isn't a video asking you to feel warmly toward the tick currently sitting somewhere in your dog's fur. But it is asking you to see it clearly, just this once. A creature with a sensory system built for ambush. A bite engineered by 100 million years of trial and error, and a genuine, still debated role in the wider food web that shaped it and, in places, still depends on it. Next time you find one and flick it away without a second thought, you'll at least know exactly what you're flicking, and that, in its own patient, unpleasant way, it earned that moment of your attention first. If this kind of reframe is your thing, the next one is already waiting for you.